They got him out. After more than 36 hours hiding in a mountain crevice at 7,000 feet, wounded, hunted by an entire nation, evading the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, local tribesmen with hunting rifles, and a government offering $60,000 for his capture, a United States Air Force colonel was pulled alive from the Zagros Mountains of Iran. The date was April 5th, 2026, Easter Sunday. The President of the United States wrote 2 words on his social media account in the middle of the night. We got him. 155 American aircraft had been involved in his rescue. Special operations forces had fought their way into and out of hostile Iranian territory twice. The CIA had launched a disinformation campaign inside Iran to buy precious hours. 2 MC-130J transport planes, disabled on an abandoned Iranian airstrip during the extraction, had been deliberately destroyed rather than left behind. 4 helicopters were abandoned and burned, and the colonel, a weapons systems officer, the man in the back seat of an F-15E Strike Eagle call sign Dude 44, had made it all possible with something the United States Air Force had been quietly preparing him for since before he ever flew a combat mission. Not a gun, not a radio, not a knife. A program called SERE, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape. This is the story of how a $90 million fighter jet goes down over enemy territory and what happens to the human being inside it when it does. It is a story about the invisible architecture built underneath every American combat pilot, the invisible scaffolding of training, doctrine, and classified contingency planning that most Americans never see and that very few people in the world fully understand. It is also a story about a single man on a mountainside, alone, wounded, cold, deciding minute by minute whether to move or stay still, whether to signal or stay silent, whether the footsteps he could hear below him belonged to people who wanted to save him or people who wanted to sell him. If you want to understand what the Air Force actually sends into battle, what is really sitting inside that cockpit when the ejection handle is pulled, this is the story you need to hear. Subscribe if you haven't already, and stay with me. The morning of February 28, 2026, changed the Middle East in ways that are still being reckoned with. In the early hours before dawn, American and Israeli aircraft launched a coordinated series of strikes across Iran, targeting military installations, command and control infrastructure, and senior leadership. Among those killed in the opening hours was Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The war, which had no official declaration and no public warning, had begun. The operation was called Epic Fury. Within days, American fighter jets were flying thousands of combat sorties over Iranian airspace. By the time an F-15E from the 494th Fighter Squadron, based out of Royal Air Force Lakenheath in Suffolk, England, took off on the night of April 3rd, U.S. Central Command had logged more than 13,000 missions over Iran. More than 12,000 targets had been struck. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had told the American public that Iran had no anti-aircraft equipment, that their radar was 100% annihilated, that U.S. forces were unstoppable. President Trump, in a primetime address just 2 days before, had declared, "There is not a thing Iran can do to stop us." The crew of Dude 44 had heard the briefings. They had read the threat assessments. They were professionals, experienced, trained, and prepared. The pilot and the weapons systems officer had done this kind of mission before. The F-15E Strike Eagle is one of the most capable combat aircraft in the history of military aviation. It flies fast, it flies low when it needs to, and it carries enough lethality to reshape a battlefield. None of that saved them. Over southwestern Iran, in the mountainous province of Kogaluya and Boyar Ahmad, something hit Dude 44. Analysts would later conclude it was almost certainly a man-pad, a man-portable air defense system, a shoulder-fired missile, the kind of weapon that doesn't show up on radar warning systems, the kind that a single soldier, kneeling in a field, can fire upward into the darkness without any of the sophisticated technology that the United States had spent weeks systematically destroying. Iran is weak, a defense analyst told reporters in the days that followed. But it is still lethal. Both crew members ejected. Both landed on Iranian soil. The pilot was found within hours and rescued by special operations forces. His name has not been released. The weapons systems officer, a colonel, a senior officer, was not found. His beacon was intermittent, his location was uncertain, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was already moving. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what the Air Force builds into every pilot before they ever fly a combat mission. The program is called SERE. It stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, and it is not a course you take once and forget. The origins of SERE trace back to the Second World War, when the British began developing systematic doctrines for downed aircrews operating behind enemy lines. The Americans formalized their own program at the end of that war and the beginning of the Cold War. It was the Korean War that gave SERE its modern shape. American POWs in North Korean camps had been subjected to interrogation techniques that the military had never fully prepared them for. Prisoners broke. Confessions were recorded and broadcast. The military reviewed what happened, and they built a program designed to ensure it would never happen the same way again. Vietnam deepened the curriculum. When American pilots began going down over North Vietnam in the 1960s, some of them spent years in captivity at the Hanoi Hilton and other prison camps. What they endured and how they held together, or failed to, became the foundational case studies for everything the Air Force teaches today. The program is run out of Fairchild Air Force Base in Washington State. Every Air Force aircrew member attends a 19-day course. They start in the classroom. They move to the field, 6 days in the mountains of the Colville and Canixu National Forests, where they learn shelter construction, land navigation, camouflage, food gathering, water procurement, and how to treat battlefield injuries with the supplies in their survival kit. Then they return to Fairchild for what the Air Force calls the Resistance Training Laboratory, a simulated captivity environment, stress inoculation, the code of conduct. More than 6,000 airmen go through this course every year. The survival kit itself is a marvel of compressed engineering. It is built into the ejection seat and the pilot's flight suit, modular, environment-specific, designed around what the Air Force calls the golden period, 3 to 7 days. The window of time when the human body, supplied with minimum calories and water, can still function well enough to evade, signal, and wait for rescue. In a desert environment like much of Iran's southwest, water purification tablets are critical. High-calorie ration bars are stripped to minimum weight, a combat tourniquet, hemostatic dressing for arterial bleeding, a signal mirror, a radio, and a pistol. The pistol is not a weapon of war. No combat pilot is going to fight his way out of hostile territory with a 9mm sidearm against soldiers with rifles. The pistol is a last resort, an option of absolute final measure. What the pilot is actually supposed to use, what the entire program is designed around, is something more powerful than any weapon, his own mind. The colonel ejected from Dude 44 and came down somewhere in the mountains. He was wounded. We know this because when he was eventually recovered, Trump described him as seriously wounded and confirmed he had sustained injuries in the ejection itself. Ejecting from a modern fighter jet at speed can exert forces of up to 20 times the pull of gravity on the human body. Spinal compression, shoulder dislocations, broken bones. A pilot can be injured by the act of saving his own life. He landed in the Zagros Mountains. The Zagros Range stretches from the border of Turkey down through western Iran to the Strait of Hormuz. It is one of the most geologically ancient and physically demanding mountain ranges in the world. Limestone ridgelines, deep river valleys, sparse vegetation, temperatures that swing dramatically between day and night. It is also the traditional homeland of the Bakhtiari, nomadic tribal people who have lived in these mountains for centuries, who know its terrain intimately, and who, in the days after the crash, were being organized by Iranian state media to find the American airmen. Iranian television broadcast an announcement. Anyone who located the American pilot would receive a reward from the government. A local association of merchants reportedly offered the equivalent of $60,000. On Iranian social media, videos circulated of civilians driving their personal vehicles toward the crash site. A provincial governor offered a bounty for the crew. The colonel hid. SERE training teaches what retired Air Force Brigadier General Houston Cantwell, a former F-16 pilot who served 4 combat tours, describes as the most important tactical decision of the entire evasion phase. It happens while you are still in the parachute, still descending. You have a brief, irreplaceable window, 30, 40, 60 seconds, in which you can see the terrain around you. Where is the road? Where are the people? Where is cover? Where can I move in the dark? Your best view of where you may want to go or avoid is while you're coming down. The colonel used that window. We know this because of where he ended up. A mountain crevice. A crack in a ridgeline at approximately 7,000 feet of altitude. Invisible from the air. Invisible from the ground. In a range so large, so broken, so rugged that American surveillance drones searched for more than 24 hours without finding him. He was not passive in that crevice. He was executing a plan. SERE doctrine on signaling is precise and counterintuitive. The emergency beacon that every pilot carries can save your life. It can also get you killed. The radio signal from a personal locator beacon is traceable. In the first hours after a shoot-down, when enemy forces are actively searching and their direction-finding equipment is live, transmitting continuously is an invitation. The colonel restricted his signal. He broadcast in short, disciplined bursts. He was trying to be heard by the right people while staying invisible to everyone else. At some point, the exact timing is not public, he transmitted a brief radio message. 3 words, God is good. Back in Washington, in Riyadh, in the operations centers running Epic Fury, what was happening in the Zagros Mountains was becoming the most important event of the entire war. Trump had paused some air operations over Iran to prioritize the search. Hundreds of special operations forces had been redirected. The rescue of the pilot, completed on Friday, the same day as the shoot-down, had been kept secret deliberately. The White House did not confirm it because confirming it would tell the Iranians that there was still a second crew member to find. Intelligence operations were compartmented. The colonel's status was listed as unknown. The CIA entered the operation. The agency launched what officials later described to Axios as a deception campaign inside Iran. The message, spread through intelligence channels within Iranian networks, was simple. The Americans had already found him. He was already being moved. The extraction was underway. It was a lie designed to create paralysis in the Iranian search, to make the IRGC hesitate, to introduce doubt into their operational picture, to buy hours. While the Iranians were confused, the CIA used what one senior official described only as unique, exquisite capabilities to search for the beacon. They found it. They found him. They confirmed it was him, not an Iranian decoy, not a trap, through analysis the details of which remain classified. One official described the moment to NBC News this way. This was the ultimate needle in a haystack, but in this case it was a brave American soul inside a mountain crevice, invisible but for CIA's capabilities. The CIA immediately shared the colonel's location with the Pentagon. Trump was briefed. He ordered an immediate rescue mission. What followed was one of the most complex and dangerous combat search and rescue operations in American military history. The mission launched in daylight. This was not a choice. It was a necessity driven by the terrain, the timeline, and the tactical situation. Trump later described it publicly, saying U.S. forces spent 7 hours over Iran. The rescue force included Air Force Special Tactics teams and Navy Special Warfare operators from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the unit the public knows as SEAL Team 6, the same force that conducted the raid on Osama bin Laden in 2011. 155 aircraft supported the operation. Trump listed the composition publicly afterward. 4 bombers, 64 fighters, 48 refueling tankers, 13 rescue aircraft, and other supporting platforms. This was not a quiet extraction. This was an armada. U.S. aircraft dropped bombs on vehicles and convoys that approached the area where the colonel was hiding. 2 HH-60 Pavehawk rescue helicopters were hit by small arms fire from Bakhtiari tribesmen familiar with the terrain, the same people who had been searching for the airmen. Both helicopters sustained damage. Crew members were wounded. Both aircraft remained airborne. Israeli intelligence had been feeding targeting data to U.S. forces throughout the search. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu later confirmed that Israel had postponed planned strikes on Iranian targets to avoid interfering with the rescue mission. The IDF had struck Iranian assets to disrupt the IRGC's ability to close in on the colonel's position. Iran struck back. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, the ground attack aircraft nicknamed the Warthog, which had been flying the Sandy mission, providing close air support for the rescue helicopters, was hit by an Iranian surface-to-air missile near the Strait of Hormuz. The pilot managed to fly the damaged aircraft into Kuwaiti airspace before ejecting. He was recovered safely. A U.S. Black Hawk helicopter participating in the search was also struck. Crew members were wounded. The aircraft continued flying. When the colonel was finally reached, found in his crevice in the mountain, seriously wounded, having survived more than 36 hours on his training, his will and 3 words transmitted into the dark, he was loaded onto 2 MC-130J Combat Talon II Special Operations Transport aircraft that had landed at an abandoned Iranian airstrip nearby. Then both planes malfunctioned. U.S. forces made the decision immediately. They destroyed their own aircraft. The MC-130Js were demolished. 4 helicopters were abandoned and burned. The commandos and the colonel were transferred to replacement aircraft that had been held in reserve, and they flew out of Iran. At 12:03 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, April 6, 2026, President Trump posted on Truth Social, "We got him." Later that morning, he added, "We have rescued the seriously wounded and really brave F-15 crew member officer from deep inside the mountains of Iran." This type of raid is seldom attempted because of the danger to man and equipment. It just doesn't happen. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu called Trump to congratulate him on what he described as a perfectly executed American mission. You may be wondering by now about the pistol. The colonel never fired it. He never needed to. The point of everything the Air Force builds around a pilot, the SERE training, the survival kit, the Evasion doctrine, the beacon protocols, the code of conduct, is precisely to avoid the moment where the pistol becomes necessary. The pistol is not the plan. The pistol is the acknowledgement that the plan might fail. It is a margin, not a strategy. The actual strategy is this: keep the pilot alive, keep the pilot moving, keep the pilot invisible, and bring enough force to bear that eventually you can reach him. That strategy requires something from the pilot that cannot be packed into a kit or issued at the supply depot. It requires that the person inside the cockpit, the human being, not the aviator, has been prepared for an experience that no classroom can fully simulate. Alone, cold, wounded, hunted, with no certainty of rescue and every reason to doubt. SERE training is, at its core, about building a person who does not quit. The Air Force Code of Conduct, which every aircrew member memorizes and which forms the philosophical foundation of the entire SERE curriculum, was written in 1955 in the aftermath of Korea. Its final line reads, "I will never forget that I am an American, fighting for freedom, responsible for my actions, and dedicated to the principles which made my country free. I will trust in my God and in the United States of America." The colonel trusted in both. He climbed a 7,000-foot ridgeline. Wounded, he found a crevice in the rock. He controlled his beacon. He waited. He sent 3 words when he needed to be found, and he said nothing else until help arrived. He came home on Easter Sunday. There is a final piece of this story that deserves attention. In the hours after the shootdown, before anyone knew whether either crew member was alive, the Iranian state television broadcast something unusual. Alongside the footage of wreckage and the pronouncements of triumph, a spokesperson for the Iranian armed forces said something to the public. The military was calling on civilians not to mistreat the pilot if they found him. It was a small thing, almost nothing in the context of a war, but it was an acknowledgement, even from an adversary, of something the United States has always insisted upon, that the person inside the cockpit is a human being, not a target, not a trophy, a human being who deserves, even in the worst circumstances, to be treated as one. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps failed to find him. The CIA found him instead, in a crevice in a mountain range older than recorded history, invisible, breathing, waiting. He had nothing with him but a pistol he never drew, a radio he used exactly right, and 19 days of training at Fairchild Air Force Base that turned out to be worth more than the $90 million aircraft he had ejected from. His name has not been publicly released. He is, at this writing, recovering from his wounds. He came back with honor. If this story meant something to you, if you believe that the history of what American service members do deserves to be told this way, please subscribe to this channel. Ring the notification bell. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to go deeper on the SERE program, on Operation Eagle Claw, on the history of combat search and rescue from Vietnam to today, leave a comment below. Those stories are coming. Thank you for watching.